Hi, welcome to Parenting and Teaching with Richie Huffman. I'm Richie Huffman, President and CEO of Celebrate Preschools. On these podcasts, we'll be talking to real parents, teachers about what's going on at home, in the classroom, and everything in between. I hope you find these conversations informative, helpful, sometimes funny, and sometimes serious. So let's go ahead and get started. Hey, I'm Richie.
And this is Allie.
And we're here with Lisa
Wiederlight.
Thank you. We've rehearsed that prior too, and I still messed it up. Talking about communication between teachers and parents. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I am the mother of an 18-year-old young man now with autism and epilepsy and a couple other diagnoses. We were in a non-public placement for a while with his disabilities, and now we are in a public placement. And I run an autism nonprofit called Safe Minds, which is a national 501c3 nonprofit based in Baltimore.
Okay. What's his name?
His name is Joshua.
Okay, cool. All right.
He's your only.
Yeah.
How'd you get involved with Safe Minds?
I was actually working with a different nonprofit. It wasn't an official nonprofit called the Autism Policy Reform Coalition. And just like the name, we were formed to work to make autism policy with the federal government more effective and accountable, because right now it's unfortunately neither. And it was a group of us from many different organizations and walks of life.
So how long have you been with them now then?
3.5 years, actually.
Okay.
Time flies.
I thought you were actually the founder.
No, actually, Safe Minds has been around for 18 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it in other states or just in Maryland?
So we're headquartered in Baltimore, but we're national in scope. A lot of our board members are, actually most of our board members are not from Baltimore.
Yeah.
We've got our board presidents in Aspen, our treasurers in New Jersey.
Oh, very cool. But you have an office here, right?
Yes, we're
Okay.
headquartered here.
You're in Maryland, right?
I know we want to talk about communication between parents and teachers, but tell us about that journey leading up to where we're at now.
Wow, it's so long now.
Yeah.
It seems like, in some ways it seems like yesterday, in some ways it seems like 100 years.
Yeah, I bet.
Long in terms
Yeah.
of Josh's life, you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
And mine now.
18. It's a long time.
Yeah. So my son was diagnosed after fighting for a diagnosis when he was 33 months old, which 18 years, I guess 15 years later is still unfortunately early for diagnosis of autism. Unreal, but he was diagnosed at a daycare center, much like you all run, not by the schools, not by doctors, and they actually didn't diagnose him officially because they can't do that, but they told us to probably seek some help in a very nice way. He was in an infants and toddlers program for a while. We lived in Southern Maryland then, and then at 5 years old, after he joined they had another early intervention program with the public schools in Southern Maryland. We moved up here so that he can get some assistance at another non-public school. And he was one of the youngest kids at Kennedy Krieger's lower school when he was 6. And now they have a younger program for more kids with autism. But he was the youngest. And he was at Kennedy Krieger and some other non-publics. And it's been a little bit of a fight to make sure he got what he needed. I had to advocate pretty strongly and get involved and make it my second or third job to make sure he got what he needed.
Yeah.
And now he's at a public school here in Baltimore County, loving it and thriving.
Yeah.
How long has he been in public schools then? He went from Kennedy straight to, was he in kindergarten in a public school?
He was.
Okay.
He was. But he started at his high school now in April.
Oh.
So we were a little concerned about going from non-public most of his academic career to a high school, basically what would be his senior year in high school. But since he's on a different track, he'll be in school till he's 21. But they have done a fantastic job in Baltimore County and in the specific high school. I couldn't be happier.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm sitting there thinking, the people that I talk to, moms with children with autism, it's always the same story. I had to fight. If moms or dads are not fighting, where do you think, or where do these teachers or where do these administrators think that these children, what happens to them if the mom's not fighting for their well-being?
That's something that makes me sad when I think about it. there were budgets, right? And most parents don't really know, and no one educates parents if they don't get involved in support groups, that you can ask for things. And I always tell people, just like anything in life, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. My son has a lot of speech therapy services. He speaks, but he has language issues. And, if you don't ask for the services and really kind of get outside evaluations, not just the school's evaluations, if you don't advocate for it, you won't get it, because again, every student is a number. I mean, understandably so, to defend the school, they do have a budget. Right. But as a parent, it's your job to make sure your kid gets what he or she needs. And we always tell people get outside evaluations. We got a great evaluation from Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital. There are great sources that people can actually go to. I know there's a section on resources, but Pathfinders for Autism has a fantastic website and resources for parents in this area, in Maryland in general. Kind of have to make it your responsibility as a parent to make sure that you get what they need, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, and I think to answer your question too, Richie, as a teacher and a special educator myself, I think that there's still obviously great teachers and great schools available for the kids whose parents aren't necessarily like Lisa, who are going out of their way and joining organizations and asking questions and finding those grants and programs and things that are available. But it's unfortunate because those kids just will get the bare minimum. They're going to get their school, and they'll get their great teachers who are special educators and trained in this, and they'll get those administrators in those schools that service them to the extent they can, but it doesn't go past there. And I feel like oftentimes the kids who are labeled with a disability have parents that are on one side of that big spectrum. They're either very heavily involved and really invested, and then there's unfortunately just the ones who just aren't there.
Yeah.
And
I would also add to that, I bet that you probably had to educate yourself really quickly.
Yeah, there's no
book on being a mom with autism, right?
I mean, there's one side that, there's the fight, but also you got to understand what you're fighting for. So I would think that you would have to educate yourself and bring yourself up to speed real quick.
And the biggest resource is really parents, who've been through it. And we talk about, how did you get through this? Or, what resource can I get for that? Or can I even ask for this? And, there's a source called Rights Law, WRIGHTS Law, and it's online. And they have a lot of conferences, and they have webinars, and you have to educate yourself. And without sounding too negative, like when you're up at 2:00 in the morning worrying about your kid, that's when you do it. Can't sleep anyway. May as well read this new thing.
Start Googling.
So, and then you have to work collaboratively with the team, because, you aren't the only person who decides. So you have to bring your evaluations and say, okay, so I read this and I experienced this. And so how can we get little Johnny this? And the other thing is to go to the classrooms and do observations to make sure what's on that piece of paper is actually what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think you started to touch on it because you said the team, but I don't know if I know because I'm a special educator, but I don't know if all of our listeners really know what the team means, because it's not just the family like you said. So can you explain that a little bit? Because we are here talking about communication. So I think it's important to talk about like who those members of that special education team are, or the non-special education team that you work with at schools.
Sure. So I know in special education, you have something called an individualized educational plan, an IEP, and that's something based on federal law that every kid has with a certain diagnosis like autism. Some kids who may have ADHD or that are considered other types of disabilities may have a Section 504 plan. But just even in general, it's a team made up of teachers, paraeducators, administrators, sometimes depending on how far you bring it, county level administrators. They call those county IEPs, and it's groups of people, maybe a speech therapist, occupational therapist, come together at least once a year to review and discuss your child's needs and goals and objectives that are measurable for each year in each educational program. What parents don't know is if you're unhappy during the year and something happens, you can call an emergency IEP meeting. The team can call, the school team or part of the team can call an emergency IEP meeting. And it happens. It's happened for me a couple of times. The county can call it. And even when your child is paid for by the county to go to a non-public, they have a liaison from the county public schools who liaisons with that non-public, and that county person can also call an emergency IEP.
An emergency is not always bad. I feel like that word, sometimes it's just an update. Sometimes you realize they need something new, or they have to make a slight tweak or change something to the behavior portion of it, and so it's not always
Right.
an emergency, but you definitely put it on there. But I think a year is always a very long time between that gap if you're not having those in between ones. So since we're talking about communication, what are some other ways you found as Josh was growing up that you could continue that communication between home and parents? Because disability or not, I think that's important in our preschools here at Celebrate, but also in public schools.
All right.
Can I just say something real quick? I mean, when I sit here and listen to you speak, like I'm not sure who I'm speaking to, right? I hear a mom. I think sometimes I hear a physician. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking to a psychologist or psychologist, right?
Yeah.
So you're like all wrapped up in one.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like it's
Yeah, you're an impressive woman.
It's my well, I think you had to, back to the educating yourself. I think you had to become knowledgeable in all aspects of autism.
So I think it's a choice you make. And early on, when your kid's diagnosed and you take that, deep breath, oh my gosh, what am I going to do?
I'm in it.
Right. You can choose to be in it or you can choose not to be in it. And, I'll get a little personal with people because I think we've all been through this. If you've had a kid diagnosed with something and you get a little angry, and like this, my life that I thought, and we've talked about this before, my life that I thought was going to be here is now going to be here. And for me, I decided that, I couldn't be angry anymore. So what was I going to do? And I was just going to accept that the person I was going to be here is now the person I'm going to be here. And people can't see this on the radio, but I'm sorry, or on podcast. But you just kind of make a decision. Like, I'm still the same person. My focus is just going to be on this now. And I just would have put this energy somewhere else if I didn't put it with my son. And since my son is the most important thing in the world, then, he's just got it all. So, but it is a funny story about that. I was in Expectations in Howard County and I was doing, you all know that. And I was doing some type of evaluation for my son for a different service provider and his big books of stuff. And it was like surveys and everything. And this woman walked by, I'll never forget that. She said, "Excuse me, are you a speech therapist?"
Right. Check. Yes.
I said yes.
Pretty much.
Did you really? Did you say yes? Did you? Aww.
Yes.
But you could actually check that box.
I'm thinking about it. So I forget what the initial question was, but yes.
That's amazing. But I just wanted to touch on like what you had to go through and just all the different hats that you have to wear with having being a mom with a child with autism.
And I would add to that, and a lot of moms would also say this, like, a doctor in a way. Like people say, oh, the University of Google. I'm like, look, I can still read a study and I still know research. And our kids, as we talked about at Fashion Rocks Autism this week, a lot of our kids are sick. Yeah. 75% have GI issues. My son has GI issues. Up to 40% have seizures. My son has seizures. We're always looking at medicines and treatments. And, on top of that, like we're talking about now is, working with the schools. And I always say it's like a bicycle spoke, and I'm the center of the spoke, and I'm making sure that all the different parts of the wheel are moving and that the team members are part of that. But I'm the captain of the team, and that's kind of how I see it in Josh's life. And I'm fortunate to have the resources to be comfortable in that role and to have support for that role. But the teachers are a really important part and administrators are a really important part. And what I would say is I think we've had really contentious meetings with the schools before. One meeting that I walked out on and brought a lawyer in the next meeting because it was not a very fair or effective meeting. And you have to teach people the way to treat you. And I think that's important, that the team has expectations and respects everyone at the table.
And I'm serious.
But then I've had great meetings where I brought cupcakes to the team because I appreciated what they've done for my son and that we are working together and that it's difficult at times because autism is very complex. And, I think the most important part is teachers choose their jobs, but they don't have to be there. They can choose another job. And to show when you feel like they're doing their best, even if things may or may not be working the way you want, that you appreciate them. So, when it's Teacher Appreciation Week, everybody gets a $5 gift card to Starbucks. And then like my son started at his school, and then about 2 weeks later, it was Teacher Appreciation Week. And then a month later, school was ending and they still got $5 appreciation cards because I do appreciate them doing that. Right. And I drop my son off at school every morning and they know who I am and we can interact then. And I kind of make myself available and make them feel comfortable to come to me with things. And when they do, I make them feel appreciated and comfortable to do so. Because, I was going to mention before during the IEP, you're supposed to have home to school communication. And some people like it to be written in a book, like a notebook, which doesn't work for me because I'm on the computer all the time. Some people like email, and that's okay too. But I'm kind of a more person, like face to face or on the phone or text or something. And I think that works best for me. But that takes communication with the team, and teachers don't know what you're thinking unless you tell them. And if you don't like what you're thinking, you can still tell them in a way that makes them comfortable to be told and appreciated that they're being given that information. Because again, you kind of have to run it as a team. And if it's a ill functioning or dysfunctional team, which I have had before, you have to change the members of the team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's important to start conversations with families, between family and school, early on at the beginning of the school year, all the time, because you don't want that first phone call to be a bad one, right? Because that's unfortunate for everybody on either end of the phone. And so if you have that morning hello and that constant conversation, it makes that openness easier and more clear for everybody.
Right. The other thing I would add is, like a lot of my friends will do all about Johnny, and it's a piece of paper, and they'll say what he likes, what he can eat, what he can't eat, what TV shows he likes to watch, and just ways for them to reinforce what he's doing. If you have a child who's not in special education, you could do the same thing because the kids are still in the person's classroom. Yeah. Maybe over the summer, this is something I would say, especially for special ed students, up to 40% of people with autism are nonverbal. It doesn't mean they don't have anything to say, they just don't speak. So, every year, everybody always does, what'd you do this summer? So maybe you send in and make a picture book with your kid so that the teacher can share that with the class. If they have augmentative communication devices, maybe prepare and practice with your son or daughter so they can practice participating in the class, and then maybe send the teacher an email. This is what we did this summer. Can you help Johnny or Susie talk about what they did or communicate what they've done, even though they can or cannot talk or be understood very well? Yeah. So, I think the teachers are there to help, and they want to help for the most part. They could always get other jobs, but they chose this noble profession, so you have to help them do it as effectively as possible.
Tell us, I have to sit, I'm going to diverse for 1 second. So, I believe that this journey has made you who you are today, right? All the things we named, right? Great mom, psychologist,
speech pathologist,
right? all the above, right? Who's made you this impressive woman that we see here today.
Thank you.
What were you doing before this occurred?
So before this occurred, I was working as a consultant, and I had come out working for the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy as a media relations person, and was working for a group of drug law enforcement administrators across the country, and had ideas to run one of those drug law enforcement task forces funded by the White House.
I didn't know if this event made you this strong leader, or I think you already had that before you got started. Yeah. Sounds like it to me.
A little bit.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But you have to put who you are into whatever you're doing,
Yeah, I got you.
And that's kind of what I decided, because I couldn't fight it anymore.
Yeah. There was another plan for you, for this.
I guess so.
This leadership skills that you possessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool stuff.
People always go, really? You were doing that? Really? And I was like, yeah, I know. It's a total other world.
Yeah. I could see that now that you mentioned that. But yeah, this is definitely a totally different world that we're on now.
So what's your advice for teachers and parents? Because that's kind of where our podcast focuses on. But what would your advice be for those new special education teachers? Because you've been through this with Joshua a lot longer than these new ones. And I remember being brand new and wondering, how can I really connect with every single one of these kids and their families, even when their families might not want to?
Or advice for me, right? In communicating or bringing this to the attention of our preschool teachers.
Right. For the most part, I would say to remember that nobody knows the child better than the parent, and to either overtly or covertly involve that parent as much as possible in whatever way you can, and to maybe give them the confidence that they can be that leader and that they can be, even if they don't think they are. Because a lot of parents, especially of young kids, it's really difficult. You get, I think, better with age, like wine, and with experience.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't always like this. I mean, there were times that I was deer in headlights, and maybe to connect them with other resources like support groups and that sort of thing, because parents for other parents, like I said before, are still the best resource. But to consider them part of a team. And because one person can't do all of this, and even one teacher can't do all of this, or one company can't do all of this. But it really, I don't want to say it takes a village because that's been overused, but it takes more than a village for our community, and we all have to work together. And again, to consider that, and I've said this in IEP meetings because again, I haven't had always wonderful functioning team. We don't have to like each other, but we have to respect each other,
right?
And to understand, like that there's after someone leaves, Celebrate, or after someone leaves school, that child's going home to a family, and that family is dealing with that child 24 hours a day, even if the child's at Celebrate or in elementary school or high school or middle school. So, lots of times our families don't have the support they need and anywhere, and to consider that as well. And for parents to consider, again, that they're lucky to have teachers who care. And I always assume that the teacher cares, and that's why they're there, because they could be probably making a lot of money somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that they've worked really hard to get where they are.
Yeah.
And that we have to work together, because, again, no one teacher, no one parent, no one organization can do it by themselves. And you get a lot further if you can work together.
Are we making headway? Do you feel as if we're making headway? I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
I would love to say yes. I think it really depends on the school. I think, it depends on the leadership in the school. The leadership at my son's school is extraordinary. The leadership at my son's past school, which shall remain nameless, was less than extraordinary. And that follows through the teachers. When my son walks in and every single teacher who sees him says, "Hello, Joshua," that's striking to me.
Yeah.
Whereas nobody said hi to him or smiled at him at his other school, and nobody looked at each other at his other school.
And that way.
Right? I mean, that's not a pleasant place for anyone to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but that happens in corporations, and it happens everywhere.
Yeah, it's a culture.
But I think the leadership is individualized and very important. And as a parent, I think when you're looking at schools and when you're looking at organizations, and you need to keep an eye out for that to see what the environment is like, just like you would any job situation or something like that.
Okay. Is there anywhere that our teachers or our parents can go to learn more about this?
Yeah. So for parents, again, Pathfinders for Autism in Maryland, actually out of Hunt Valley, has a resource library at their headquarters. It's a wonderful local organization that serves people in Maryland. There's Parents Place of Maryland is another resource in Maryland, obviously. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with.
And you have resources online at safeminds.org, right?
We do, but not educationally based,
Okay.
more health-based.
Health, okay.
And
But
treatments.
still important.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
At safeminds.org. Because again, what I always tell parents is you can have the best education in the world, but if your kid is sick, they're not accessing the curriculum. So we feel like health is like the first step, because again, if your stomach's hurting or your kid is having a seizure, they certainly can't take anything in. So it's important to pay attention to that. And there are really good developmental pediatricians in this area, and other doctors, internal medicine, family medicine, who get it. Pathfinders also has those resources on their website. They have a resource database. And I'll be giving Celebrate some of that information as well after this.
Awesome.
And for teachers, Pathfinders also, I think, for that resource would be good. And just to talk to parents, maybe ask if you can attend a support group meeting and to get a better understanding. And then, I always say for students who want to consider special education, the autism waiver out of Maryland hires people to work in the homes of parents of children with autism with those children after school and on weekends. And if you want to gain a really good understanding of what it's like outside of those 6 hours of school and why that child is the way he is during those 6 hours of school, spend time with an autism family or another family with a child with a disability. And that's a really good way to understand the context around that child.
I think you mentioned earlier also how important it is to get in some sort of support group, right?
Yeah, I think Facebook has so many opportunities for that. Were you in any groups on
Yes,
Facebook?
there are some Facebook groups. In Baltimore County, there's a Baltimore County Autism group. In Howard County, there's one. There's a Special Education Baltimore County Facebook group. I mean, that's really helpful, especially for families of kids who have difficult behaviors because it's so hard to get out and it's very isolating. So you can get some support on Facebook. That's a great recommendation. I can't believe I didn't remember that. But
Well, I know I'm in special ed groups that sometimes I have to request to be in, but I'm in teacher ones online. I know there's one called the SPED Squad that you have to ask to be in, but it's specifically tailored for special ed teachers, and they share articles and updates and videos, but also resources and free online resources that you can use for. I've gotten communication tools on there. I've gotten behavior charts on there. They've been really, really helpful. So I know that just by searching special education teacher under the groups app on Facebook was really helpful when I was a special ed teacher. Yeah.
There's also some special education resource fairs. And I mean, for people who have kids in general ed, I know you know people who have kids in special ed, if you don't already, if you have maybe one-on-one. But there's a special education resource fair every year at St. Elizabeth's School that they put on, and that's in Baltimore City. And there's actually usually one in Timonium each year as well. And I think Autism Speaks Local is involved with that. So there are a lot of resources out there, but you just have to find the time and the energy and strength and wherewithal to make it out there. But it's well worth it. And if not, like you said, Allie, Facebook has a lot of resources out there.
Yeah. Also.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, Lisa. I think this was really engaging for our listeners, and we're excited to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for what you do.
You're welcome. Thank you for what you do.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today on Parenting and Teaching with Richie Huffman.
Thanks for tuning in. And remember, childhood only comes this way but once.
For more information, head on over to richiehuffman.com.
I'm Richie.
And I'm Allie.
And we look forward to seeing you again on another podcast.